What's up, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for, episode 50 of the 1004 show. And when you have a big number like 50, you gotta have a lot of action. And so we're gonna do that today with Della Rucker of Econogy, which is based in Cincinnati, Ohio. An incredible discussion. We talk about where people learn best, how to co-create, how to rethink economic development, and a whole bunch more. I loved this talk. I'm excited to listen to it multiple times myself, and so I know that you're going to like it too. But I just want to take a second and say thank you for listening. Thanks for caring, and thanks for being on this journey with us, which is the 1004 show. So, without further ado, Della Rucker of Econogy, episode 50 of the 1004 show. Let's go right now. All right, Della, you are heading up Econogy in Cincinnati, Ohio. What kind of got you to start this business?
Well, I am a co-founder of Econogy. So there were two of us who were co-founders. We now have about four or five partners. Uh, we founded this company really, for me, a lot of it came out of what I talked about in my book, The Local Economy Revolution. And the struggle that I hit all through the time that I was developing that and the time that I was really trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to say to the world was that I knew what wasn't working. I felt like I had a pretty clear handle by that point in life as to all the ways that we were doing the things that I cared about around economies and small businesses and local government. I knew we were doing them all wrong. And then people would ask me, how do we do them right? And I would say, I don't know. And that's not a very good answer.
So you knew
So,
the problem, but you didn't necessarily have a solution yet.
right, because by that point I had spent about 20 years doing urban planning and economic development and the like. And even if you know that system's not working, you're still pretty well stuck within that system. And I had the great good fortune to meet some folks in Cincinnati who were coming at that same question of how do we make small businesses and communities and make them more successful. And they were coming at them from very different angles. So, for example, my co-founder, Owen Raish, had come into this largely from an education perspective, where he was looking at the university context and saying the way that we're teaching, the way that we are doing this new hot thing called experiential learning isn't being done very effectively. So together we started figuring out what happens when we start pushing these systems together and making them work together. And that's where we ended up with Econogy.
So, with the experiential education, is that basically like as a child, as an infant, they're learning to crawl, to then stand up, to then walk, but then at some point in the
Mm-hmm.
education system, we get rid of that kind of way of learning.
So it's interesting that you started with that idea because the idea is when you look at what university people are talking about and high school people are talking about when they say experiential learning, a lot of it's coming from who is the psychologist who figured out a lot of that stuff about how people learn. And he did that work with babies. So I thought you were going that way first. But his initial work was with looking at how people learned with regard to infants and toddlers and preschoolers. That got built onto by a lot of people. And by the time we get to the early mid 2000s, there's a pretty good body of evidence that says that people at all ages, university students, high school students, etc., learn best, learn most effectively, learn fastest, and learn most meaningfully when they're in as close to a real world experience as possible. And so a lot of universities bought onto that idea and said, "Oh man, this is great. We gotta get the students out doing real world work." Well, what happened is that if you're doing real world work, but you're coming at it from the context of the university, then you're you're not connecting. So we've encountered a lot of business people who said never again. because they would do a project with a university and they would say, "Oh man, that was horrible." So, but what we saw was that there was this great untapped resource in terms of university students and universities that really wanted to do good learning, do good experiential learning, and small businesses and community organizations that couldn't get the kind of help that they needed to be successful.
It's
So I pushed
wild
them together.
because whether it's economic developments or urban planning, universities, I think we all want the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But we're so tied to not really being able to help, and I think it's because there's so many layers of bureaucracy. There's a lot of reasons, but so we work with a local university in our backyard, and it's hearing some of the stories that they have to go through, and it's like, you guys, like you can't even accept a credit card. Like, it is 2017. Like, this shouldn't be for a $30 purchase. Like, this should be very easy to do. So I love what you do because I live this every day, and it's near and dear to my heart. We're actually working on a book ourselves about better ways to improve this, and a lot of it is the stories that we've learned ourselves here in Southeastern Virginia or with other individuals like you, Della.
Oh, cool.
And I think, like, you can have problems, but if you don't have solutions to that, it's difficult. So when you were those 20 years experience in economic development, in urban planning, what were some of the challenges that kept coming up over and over and over again?
Oh, sure. So on the community side, so one of the challenges was that small businesses and communities and community residents and community organizations were all treated as entirely different things. So, there's a group of people who are dealing with small business, and there's a group of people who are dealing with nonprofits, and there's a group of people who are dealing with something else. And near the twain shall meet, so they don't talk to each other. So that was one barrier, was just that simple fact of people, even if they talk a good fight about, we want to be inclusive and break down silos or whatever, saying it and doing it are two very different things, that it's hard to do, especially when, as I learned acutely, you've lived inside one of those or lived inside those kind of silos for a while, and you're just, the walls are there. You know that you're inside something, but you can't figure out how to get out of it. So that's one thing that I've always seen. Another thing is that nobody ever has enough resources, and whether that's time, whether that's staff, whether that's money, and those are all interchangeable to some point. But the degree to which we can end up chasing our tail, again, getting sort of stuck into our own paradigm of saying, oh, I don't have enough money to do it right, so I have to just chewing gum and baling wire it, or, oh, we don't have enough money to do it right, so we're just going to have to struggle on with what we have, or, oh, we don't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's that continuing to be stuck in kind of the basic paradigm. And that's university people, that's small business people, that's community people, same story, different words. What we have been finding is that if we can be the one that shows people their silo, and that door isn't just a door, but it's sort of an airlock to somebody else's silo, and we can move people and time and ideas and money through those in ways that they didn't know they could, then the amount of value that's available is enormous. We've got something completely new, broken open, and we can do things that we couldn't do previously, like give businesses high quality strategic advice and help them figure out how to pivot properly without them having a 6-digit budget to hire a fancy consulting firm with a big name.
Yeah, and I think what's crazy too is, as the world has evolved, a lot of these training programs or things that are paid for by the government are based on things that might not be valuable anymore, right? So I think business owners are trying to increase their bottom lines to grow those things to help people, but things that so like the SBDC and the SBA, they are chartered basically to retain and attract new jobs, to make more money,
right?
Spending time with those specific businesses, and it's very difficult that as the world, we're getting less employees at more businesses, that data
Right.
is not matching that. And so we're not going to see these companies. And so you're on the 1004 show. 1004 is really from a story 4 years ago where I was at an economic development job summit, and someone said, all this area needs is to relocate, whale hunt for businesses with 1,000 employees, right? So imagine Procter and Gamble is there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes,
imagine
indeed.
Norfolk or Virginia Beach or southeastern Virginia saying, you know what, if we can just move Procter and Gamble to our region, that's going to save everything, but do it 4 times with 4 different companies. I looked at that and said, technology isn't everything yet, but these businesses are having far less employees. Why
Mm-hmm.
don't we try and flip-flop that and help grow 1,000 businesses with an average of 4 employees each? You're going to have a better community. You're going to have a better understanding of where the world is instead of those bigger companies. And so it's always interesting to talk with people that might have similar thoughts to me
Absolutely.
about this. And I do get in fights with our local economic development sometimes because they're like, oh, it's not all, whale hunting isn't the only thing we do. And I'm like, yes, but do something for the small business community. They're asking you for something. Make it easy for them.
So a couple of things. Number one, I love the phrase whale hunting. I am probably going to shamelessly rip off that one.
Sure.
I'll give you credit, but the term I've always used is big game hunting,
Mm-hmm.
but I like whale hunting even better. Um, yeah, the tradition. So there's in the economic development profession, there is a tradition, a long history of what we're now calling whale hunting, of that search for the big business that's going to bring in all the employment and solve all our problems. That dates back for decades and decades. And it's interesting when you work in economic development, and I get in fights with economic developers on a very regular basis. I'm a CXD, I'm a certified economic developer. I have the industry standard professional, pile of letters, et cetera, and I get in arguments all the time over this. And the interesting thing that's happened is that there's a realization that whale hunting is not going to solve everything, but whale hunting is where the energy internally and the energy from the political context typically comes about. And so we keep whale hunting. The other thing that's worth keeping in mind that I think is a really important overlooked issue when it comes to small business and small business support and small business policy is that the standard economic development office was set up to deal with about 8 to 10 big companies in town, whether they're doing recruiting or whether they were doing their business recruitment or their business retention. It was a big industry kind of area of work. But as you pointed out, that number of small businesses has increased, dropped over the last 30, 40 years even. The practice of how you do economic development hasn't really changed to address that. And so what happens is these economic developers who understand and know that there's a better way, there's more important stuff here, we need to grow our small businesses, we need to bring them up from inside of us. And as an aside, that's why Procter and Gamble is in Cincinnati today, because of 2 guys in the 1830s. But to treat all those small businesses like that requires hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of touches, and your standard small business organization doesn't have to do that. So the conventional model doesn't work to really help small business. We need a new model. And again, that was part of what we were going after in leveraging in this vast untapped resource of university students and undergraduates and young professionals who need and want to show the world what they can do and just need a real chance to be able to do it.
Love it. I always think of it too as if you're familiar with a sales strategy where if you're retaining your clients, it's actually cheaper than to try and find a new one. And so when I'm having conversations with these economic development folks all across the country, that's one thing that I like to use, because they're like, oh, okay. And so what's interesting is, in our findings, I think we're still very early on in the bell curve, where we have people like you that completely adopt what we're saying. And then there are people on the other end that are like, nope, get out of our way. Like, we're for big businesses. I mean, we've had conversations where people are literally, in our town too, where people are like, nope, this isn't what we care about. This, like, we want big businesses. And so we go, thank you. And we put them on we'll email you again in 6 months. Right? Because maybe you'll figure it out at some point. But small businesses, see, what's interesting is the facts that people will use. 65% of net new jobs are from small businesses.
Yep.
But yet you don't see a lot of attention towards those pieces. You still only see the ribbon cuttings for the big businesses. And I'm not just talking about my area. I'm talking about areas across the world. And so one thing that's changed recently is the amount of in-home jobs that people have, the way that people are now maybe entrepreneurs if they are an Uber driver or they rent their Airbnb house out. This whole new economy has changed, and now cities are making and forcing these businesses, these individuals, to get business licenses. So it's just interesting how all these things are changing, yet the tools available for them is not yet.
Well, and one of the things that I always point out to folks when we talk about small business and local government, and we talk about what happens when those two systems come together, is that small businesses, the survival of a small business depends on the ability to do things fast, to make decisions quickly, to be able to stay focused on your business, to not get bogged down in unnecessary process. But for a person who works in government, and many of my closest friends work in government, and they work in economic development agencies, they work in city planning agencies, I have enormous respect for what they do. And there's a lot of them that do things that I don't have the personal constitution to do. But the main thing is that their responsibility is to the community, and their responsibility is to protect, to preserve, to be looking out for the competing needs of different individuals. When you're a small business owner, I'm a small business owner, I don't have to do that. I don't have to care whether, I'm impacting anybody else or not. But if I'm a government person, that's my core responsibility. And so when we see governments, I think that's part of the reason why that gets overlooked, that we don't see governments, sort of adapt to new kinds of businesses as fast as the small business people would often like them to, because it's their job, it's their responsibility to be careful. And there's a huge tension between being the small business person and being the government person. But it's yin yang, we as a culture, as a country, as a world, we need both of those. And so I don't disparage the small business owners who say, we got to go fast. Why are you making me wait so long for that permit? And I don't disparage the city planners or the city economic development people who say, I can't make a decision until the next time the committee meets, because the committee is the people who were appointed to make these decisions.
Sure. So what is a small business? Define it. In your terms.
Man, that's a trick question. It's not really a trick question, but it's interesting that you asked that, because of course everybody anymore has a different definition on what that means. For me, a small business is one that has where you're talking to the person as much as you're talking to the position. When you're dealing with a larger company, you're dealing with bureaucratic structure, and that can be a small company or it can be a large, in terms of number of employees. When you're dealing with a company that has that is defined by its bureaucratic process, you're dealing with a very different entity than one that's still sort of trying to figure it out and still throwing spaghetti at the wall and still, trying to sort of figure things out. I think one of the really interesting challenges inherent in that question is that those kind of lines are completely bleeding over. So I have a small business with about 10 employees and a whole ton of contractors. And my biggest challenge right now is creating structure, creating enough bureaucracy, creating enough system for people to be able to say, okay, I know what I got to do. And, I know how I'm going to get done. And, so-and-so did it. And he's going to, I know generally that he's going to do it the right way. Whereas on the other hand, you have companies like Zappos, which is, hundreds of employees. I've done some work with the downtown project in Las Vegas. And you take the tour of their facility, huge building, several hundred people. Of course, they're wholly owned by Amazon, but they still operate very independently. Their biggest struggle is how do we keep that sense of flexibility and that sense of autonomy within the necessity of the larger structure.
So I know exactly what you're going through. Recently, I put together, I don't even know what to call it, a manuscript, a document. I jokingly, I don't remember what I called it, but I made a fun little name with it. My company went from 100% in one brick and mortar building to a completely remote office where my team is now distributed for a lot of reasons. And so we look at, just because things were done one way forever doesn't mean that that's the way that we need to do it. And so we had a nice 5,000 square foot office in downtown Norfolk for 5+ years. And we decided that as we're becoming more mobile and working with more businesses across the world, we should try and be more mobile so that we're not fixed to one building. And so while doing that, my team and I decided that we needed to put together tasks, if you will, or roles. And man, that is not a fun thing to do, because you want to write, like, we're a fun company. We'll throw the football every once in a while. We'll go to the bar and do these things. We still will work hard, but we'll definitely play hard too. And
absolutely.
It was one of the most painful things. And after about 2 days of doing it, I decided to finally just Google, like, how do you do this? And I don't know that it helped, but like, you're trying to go through time and be like, what are all the things that my team has done? And try and task them to do certain things and not piss certain people off. And it is not fun to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so here's an interesting thing. So part of because we work with university students, we work with undergraduates, we work with graduates. That's kind of the lion's share of our workforce, is the really high-powered people who are still in their undergrad, but they want to be in the real world. They want to be doing something that matters and is worthwhile, whether it's on the business side or the community side. And so as we grow, a lot of our sort of senior leadership, quote unquote, is 21, 22, 23 years old. They are now managing our projects. I have a gentleman who is, I think he's 21 going on about 40. He's an extraordinary gentleman. But he's my finance manager. He handles all the books. And when you have a team like that and you ask them a question like, well, how do I do this? So 2 things happen. One is, oh my God, I've never done that before. But then the other one is they figure out how. And a lot of how they figure out how is go Google something. Google, find 3 or 4 things, put them together, make sense of them. So, I don't think I think you Googling how to, move your business into this new grand phase is, rock on.
Yeah,
we love Google around here. That's our research department.
Absolutely. But you said this, and I took notes. So I'm going to read this. People learn best when they are in real world situations, right?
Yes.
And so I think that might be something like education isn't done, right? Schools are not done. People are still going to learn, but the way they learn is what's changing.
Absolutely.
Right? And so if someone can go and get an answer in 30 seconds, why should they have to sit in a line for 3 hours, ask that question, and then be 3 hours out of that? Like we should be a community, a world that is trying to be more efficient. And I think that's where the education world is moving towards. But I think a lot of people are terrified of that. Let's talk about Econogy. You guys offer a lot of services. What are some of the services that you guys help communities with?
So the core thing that we build around is putting together high quality, high talent, high innovation teams to take on a complex, complicated project. So it's a question that doesn't have any easy answers. It's not something that you can just, sort of do the math like, many of us unfortunately learned how to do algebra, where you just kind of plug through the steps and it spits out the result. We work on the things that are that don't have those easy answers, and that really need some muscle and some time and some brain power to work it out. And the way we can do that is because we're working with students and young professionals, we could put together a diverse team. So where you might get one person or two people, if you're lucky, to figure out your business plan, we will put on it a team that they'll be part-time, but we'll put on it a team that will be a very diverse mix of people. And it may run the gamut from industrial design to market analysis, to sustainability, to data analytics, you name it. We'll design a team for that, for what's needed, and then we'll deploy. Now, how we deploy is a couple of different ways. We can do conventional consulting, where it's, you have a project that you have something you need to figure out. We have a product that needs to find a new market. We have a business plan that needs to pivot. So there's standard consulting. We have a system that's a little more structured, that's for startups. So people have come out of like an accelerator or an incubator and are trying to figure out how to get to sustainable growth numbers, because there's very little help for those folks. So we put a team with them that's customized to what they need to help them to get to sustainable sales. We have a chief sales officer who is crucial to kind of helping guide those strategies. We have a locally based neighborhood crowdfund platform that is used predominantly for community programs, or community projects rather, where you're not going to be able to come up with enough money. Even our rates aren't very low, but they're a little lower than conventional. But for a lot of community stuff or local small businesses, they can't afford that. So we have a crowdfunding platform that one's in beta in Cincinnati right now. And then the last thing we have, and there's a couple other flavors on some things, but we have a training system that's a facilitated peer group system for small business owners or C-suite types, where they work in collaboration. We call that Advantage Development Systems, where they work in collaboration with other small business owners or people who are in their same shoes in different companies to learn how to manage their fundamentals better, improve their merchandising, adjust their marketing strategies, and they do that year over year. They'll do that for a long-term time period. And they're working through a curriculum that's been developed to kind of guide them through how to get the data and how to evaluate their options.
Very cool.
So that's more or less the whole thing.
Very, very cool. One thing that I completely love that you're doing is you don't just say like, hey, we need to work with our youth. And in this case, we're talking 20-year-olds. You actually hire them. You work with them. I think there's a lot of organizations across the country that say one thing and don't even talk to people. And it's interesting because they say, oh, we want to make sure that our area is primed and ready for the future, and we want to retain and attract younger talent. Yet they don't even bring the younger talent into the conversation. And so I appreciate that you guys are doing that. You talked about your time in urban planning and economic development, and now that you're doing Econogy. I'm interested in some of your thoughts on economic developments and cohort-based business accelerators, incubators, co-working spaces, and whether or not you see good traction behind the businesses that typically go through that. And so that'll probably lead me to something, a different question.
Okay. Okay, cool. Well, you put a bunch of things into that one basket.
Yeah.
So co-working spaces, accelerators, incubators, and what was the other one?
Accelerators. You said that.
Yeah, accelerators and incubators, co-working spaces.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of co-working spaces are incubators and accelerators now.
Sure.
So they have some sort of programming, but I guess programming based on picking a handful of businesses and putting them through some sort of schedule, 3 months, 4 months, whatever, to try and get exponential results.
Okay.
So
So it's interesting that you asked that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good.
Okay. In Cincinnati, we actually have sort of a front row seat for that because we have, as far as I can tell, and I haven't formally documented this, but per capita, I think we've got more accelerators, incubators, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, than most cities of comparable size. I mean, we got them all over the place. We have programs that are focused on artists. We have programs that are focused on young urban people of color. We have programs that are incubator style, where you're in a physical space for a long period of time. We have programs that are almost completely virtual. We have programs that are, I mean, it completely runs the gamut. And for that reason, I hedge a little bit to kind of try to paint with too broad of a brush.
Sure.
There's certainly some that are much more effective than others. I think that one of the things that we have found is, and part of the reason why we started that second stage initiative that I described, which is the one that puts a team underneath a new business to help it get to sustainable growth, is that if you come into an accelerator or an incubator or something with a strong network of your own, with strong financial resources, with knowing how to do everything right, you're still not guaranteed to succeed, but your odds are a little bit better. And 4 out of 5 small businesses overall fail within a fairly short time period. And that runs across the nation. It runs across business types. It kind of runs a gamut. It doesn't vary too much from that 80%. Some of the best incubators, accelerator programs can get that down. We think a lot more than that. But the ones that are the hardest are the ones, and I think people, this has really been an interest of mine over the last several years, is I think people really underestimate just how unbelievably hard it is to do entrepreneurship if you're coming from a disadvantaged background. And I don't just mean gender. And I don't just mean color. I mean gender, color, immigration status, socioeconomic status. Historically, there's a growing body of evidence. You know, I don't know what you're hearing in the Norfolk area, but around here a lot of times we end up hearing sort of this great thing about, oh, well, we'll get more entrepreneurship and that'll help address poverty because they'll start new businesses and employ people and yada, 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 yada. What we're increasingly finding is that we fail to adequately address the barriers to success that people face who don't come from maybe the same backgrounds that we do. And that's an area that needs a whole lot more work practically and in terms of study.
I was talking with, and I want to get the exact notes, but there is a group out of Oakland and DC called Groundwork. Jason Towns, and Groundwork takes basically underprivileged communities and tries to build programming for them. And what's interesting is he was talking about how some of these groups, let's just call them everyone else other than the underprivileged, they don't even know to go into those markets to help them. Yet there's so much opportunity there. And so one of the stories that I brought up one of the stories that I brought up was bevel, which is a razor blade for black men, and I guess there is something with their razor burn, and this guy who developed this went through I believe a large VC out there and was like an entrepreneur in residence there, and created this product. And so to me, I think of something and I go, okay, like it's just a razor, right? But because this individual is like, no, like there's something deeper there, we're not even opening our minds to see so much more opportunity. We're just like, no, we don't care, or no, we're not going to worry about that. And so there's all this opportunity available too, and I think that's what you're getting at. That's this untapped, to the percentage of probably close to 100% of untapped opportunity. And there's this huge wave to go in there. It's going to be really interesting to see how we dive into those things and become more inclusive, because I no matter what's going on in the world right now, I think we're getting to be a more inclusive world where people are starting to try and not look at things the same way that we used to. So from like a demographics perspective, I'm starting to see people not look at race, sex, age. We're looking at what that person does, where they hang out, the things that they go on vacation. Those are stronger demographics than it's a 40-year-old white male, right?
There's an interesting side point, though, which is if you think about the gentleman with bevel. It's bevel, right?
Yeah.
That's the razor?
Yeah.
Okay, I flew out of my head for a minute. So yeah, that's a fabulous success story. And it was great that he found, and I believe it was a person of color who's a venture capitalist. I could be wrong on that one. But he found that opportunity. I can take you down a street in Cincinnati, and I can introduce you to 30 African American men and probably 50 African American women who have an idea or a concept or a product that resonates to a demographic that needs it and wants it, and who can't get that access to the funding, the guidance, the mentoring, the support.
I believe his numbers show that less than 2% of African American founders get funding.
That sounds completely on the money, and it's not great numbers for. I mean, pick your historically disadvantaged group. It's not, the numbers aren't they aren't great for any of them, and that's starting to change. And as people, find alternate ways to fund businesses, that's, I think, starting to become less and less of an issue. It may be a little easier to bootstrap than it used to be. It's certainly, the option of crowdfunding can make a big difference for some folks. But the piece that I think really needs to be addressed that isn't quite on the radar yet is, what else do these kind of businesses need in order to really fledge, to really become sustainable, to really have the impact? And I think it's more than just money.
I 100% agree. One thing that's interesting, and so can't just talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. And so I recognize that I had an event that we put on in my city, and it was primarily white people. And I recognized it before someone else did. Someone else probably recognized it too. And so last year when we did this event, I made sure that I reached out to all these groups and I said, look, you don't have to come, but I want you to know that I want you to be at this table because I think you're important. And I think individuals and groups have to be stronger leaders and say, you know what, I recognize that this wasn't what I wanted to be before, and make sure that they make that conversation happen. And so
be proactive.
You have to be proactive. And so if it's that older white gentleman that's the leader now of a chamber or something, and they want to talk about young professionals, make sure you call young professionals to be at that table with you. And I think all too often we say one thing and we do another. I try and bring, there's a guy on my team, Paul Rice. He's very into the political world, loves that stuff. And so whenever I see an opportunity to bring him into something, I'm like, hey, I want you to be here, right? Cool. He doesn't have to be at every situation, but I look at the people on my team and the people that I work with and say, you know what, like, I'm not going to be this person with you forever, but I know that you want to get somewhere, and if I can help you get there, I want to get you to that table. And so
Absolutely.
I don't think that's a hard thing to do, yet people don't do it.
We use a phrase around here sometimes called co-creation. And we say co-creation, we use that term when we talk about community groups. We use that term when we talk about small businesses. We don't want to just make something and hand it to them, which as a consultant is what I did for a good 20 years. But we want to create it to the greatest extent possible with them. And when you do that, that's where empathy comes in. And there's some very good tools. One of the interesting partnerships that we have right now is with University of Cincinnati has one of the strongest industrial design programs in the country. And one of the things that's been really intriguing in working with them is that they're training in how to uncover the user needs. They're training in the process of building empathy with the user, of pulling out really what is the user's experience. That's been a huge eye-opener for me as well. And I've worked with disadvantaged communities for a large portion of my career. There's a whole new skill set that we use now in working with small business founders, with entrepreneurs, with community organizations that didn't come from my background, that came from this other thing. So we talk a lot about co-creating, and it's a blast. It's sometimes I think it's the best part of the job.
No, I love it. I think the first time I ever really understood user experience was, I believe, from a meme on Facebook where it was where two streets met like this. And the path that people would walk, you could tell like the grass was walked on and kind of mowed down by people's feet. And I was like, so we think we built it like this, yet people are walking through diagonally. And that's why people need to get into these situations, whether it's in a business or in a community. Stop predicting what people want and instead really figure out what people are looking for. The title of your book is what again?
The title of my book, which was put out pre-Econogy, is called The Local Economy Revolution, What's Changed and How You Can Help. And the purpose of that book was really to start to capture these ideas and these trends and these things that I was seeing evolving. So we got a little more work to do on Econogy before we get it firing on all cylinders. But there'll be a revision to that book with a little bit more of what we have learned, hopefully coming up within the next year or so.
Very cool. If someone was an urban planner or an economic development and they're learning about these new strategies, what are some of the tips that you continue to give them to try and implement it in their communities?
So I think co-creation and shifting to a mindset of co-creation, shifting to a mindset of humility and learning is a very core one. And if you're coming from within a government setting where your responsibility is protection, that's even harder to do. There's some really good tools out there for facilitating that, and most planners and economic developers haven't been taught those. So it's important to seek those out.
What are some of the tools?
There's some methods for having more constructive community discussions. One is called 6 Conversations. There's a open space methodology, World Cafe. I'm just throwing out names. I invented one that was a little more designed for a public meeting context that's called Crowdsourcing Wisdom. That was another book that I did. But there's a wide variety of these tools, and it's really about selecting the right one. And the right one is probably not 3 minutes at a microphone for people to yell at you. So that would be one thing I would say. Another is really around learning to rethink and crack open the resources, particularly for small businesses. Volunteers can't do all of it, but volunteers can be helpful. Universities without an organizing structure can't do everything, but sometimes they can be helpful. Groups of retirees can't always do everything, but in some cases they can be helpful. So there's a whole variety of things out there. The other thing I would really encourage of particularly urban planners and economic development people, is to learn about design thinking and empathy-based research and user interface, user experience methods. That's information that really, really needs to be infused into those professions. And for the small business owners, you got to continue to do everything you ever had to do, and your chief cook and bottle washer, and hopefully you can get some help when you need it.
I love it. Here's our book. This is like the final first draft is what I call it. So it's called the 1004 Method. My team and I, a couple of guys on my team and I wrote it.
It's an absolutely lovely binder clip.
It's that thick. Oh, it's ridiculous. I had my lawyer print this off. So they have stuff like this. I was like, hey, I gave you so much money. Do you want to print this off for me? And he's like, yeah, sure, whatever. So our working title is the 1004 Method, an anti-Silicon Valley approach to having big impact with small businesses.
Awesome.
We'll see. So the main thing is we talk about people, place, and... See, I'm hurting myself. People, place, and education, and how to bring all those things together, all while using kind of our 1004 piece, where it's like, let's help everyone, because everyone needs help no matter what. And so I'm excited to take a look at the local economy revolution as well. Talking with Della Rucker of Econogy. You guys can learn about them at ecology.co. So what's next for Econogy?
Well, we're getting ready to do I'm sitting in our Econogy office right now. It is a weird day because of the eclipse and because a lot of our students just went back to school.
Yep.
So it's very quiet in here today. But we will have a whole new crop of people coming in. So we'll probably have a couple of hundred working with us here and, remotely within a month or two.
Wow.
We're looking at probably doing a expansion to a second city, which is as yet undisclosed. But hopefully we'll be getting ready to announce that within the next month or two. The crowdfunding site is neighborhoodgrow.com. Right now, as I said, that's only in beta for Cincinnati, but we think it's a pretty cool tool. It's a crowdfunding tool that lets you specifically look at anything that's going on for a specific local neighborhood. And we got a whole lot of other work to do. So it continues to be a four-ring circus around here most of the time. Just not today.
The good thing is there's a lot of problems that we all can solve. So
amen.
I think we can keep doing it. So Della Rucker, I appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us today for the 1004 show.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. I appreciate being able to join you.